My grant writing experience has mostly just been writing grants for Purple Maya, so that has been like 5, almost 6 years. But it's a very specific focus. So there's grants, first of all, what are they, right? They can be private, private foundations, they can be federal, they can be state. They're just any sort of entity with a lot of money that wants to give it away for some kind of philanthropic or social purpose, right? So I'm pretty familiar with getting funding for teaching coding to children or to teach entrepreneurship to adults in the community. So, but I don't know so much about arts funding or funding for technology or for creating a product versus providing a service. A lot of what Purple Maya does is providing service to people, which is different from seeking funding for, to build an app or a project or something. So, but what I do know, I will share with you, because why not? So the first thing to realize is that grants, you have to be a 501c3, right? So you have to be a nonprofit. And so all that talk we did earlier about what format, what kind of entity we want to have, if you're gonna have grants be a big part of your strategy, you have to have a nonprofit. So that's the direction you have. Either that or you have to have a fiscal sponsor. So that would be a friendly nonprofit who doesn't mind managing your money for you, basically, like holding your money and managing the accounting. Yeah, so that's the first part, right? Like that's the first, and then I think a lot of people who don't have experience with grants, they think about it in terms of like a scholarship or something, or just like, oh, somebody's gonna give you money, great, right? And there's probably people in here who have experience with that, so correct me, feel free to jump in if you have something to add, but and this was a learning process for me also, but grants are not miracles. They are not like a magical thing like, oh, great, I can just write what I'm doing and then so they will give me money to do that thing, whoever the funder is, right? First of all, many funders don't want to be the only funder funding something, or they don't want to be the only, or they don't want to be funding like more than some random percent, more than 50% of the project, or 25. Every funder is different in terms of how much they're willing to give and how involved they're willing to be, and what they want to see in order to fund you. So I'll get back into that in a second. But the main thing that I didn't realize going into it was that it's not just funding for any old thing. You have to be creating a project plan. So really what you're putting together in any grant application is kind of a description of a project that you're gonna do within a period of time that's gonna have certain outcomes. So it's not just like, hey, I've got, we wanna do this thing, give me some money to do it, like the way you would ask on like a crowdfunding or something like that. It's putting together a very specific plan of what you're gonna do and how and why, and sort of, and what the outcome of that will be, and how much money you think you're going to spend, and all these kinds of things. And then that is your application, and you can't just be applying to one funder for that, you're applying to maybe a handful of them to fund different parts of that same project, right? So every funder is going to have a different way that they conceive of what a good project plan looks like. So that's where you have to like put on your teacher's pet hat, right? Like you kind of have to go back, I don't know, I regress to being in like, 8th grade or something and trying to really just fill out that worksheet correctly, right? Like I'm trying to understand what do they want, right? Like, so some will say, I want to see your objectives, your activities, and then your results. And they've got like a worksheet for you to fill out that's their logic model that they think is the correct logic model to show those things. And then another grant for the same project perhaps will say that they want to see your goals and your intended outputs and the outcomes of those outputs in the short and the long term or something. And so they've got kind of a different theory of like what a good project plan is made up of. So that's the beauty and actually it's not really that beautiful, it's just terrible. That's the thing about writing grants, is that you're kind of learning to understand, okay, what is the logic of how they're thinking about what a good project looks like, and how can I fit into that in a way that is truthful. right? And is honest to what we're actually doing. Because you have to maintain, like, you have your own plan for what you're doing, and it can be influenced certainly by funders, certainly, but you shouldn't be, being pulled here and there in like 5 different directions, right? Right. So that said, though, I do think that there are certain things that make up a good project, and as you fill out more grants and do more project planning, you'll start to have your own opinion and your own like strength or your own like notion of what that is, and you feel more confident in it. A lot of what was talked about today is a part of that. So you have to have kind of your objectives or your goals, your things you want to achieve. You have to have a detailed and realistic sounding plan of action. So it might be listing your activities, it might be creating a project timeline that kind of details like what's gonna happen, when, who's responsible for it, and what's our staffing plan that will be able to actually do these things. And then you have to have metrics. So that's something that's been coming up all day, right? Like if you're in the business of not just making money, but trying to make some kind of social impact and building what you do around that impact, you have to have some way of showing that you have achieved something as far as your social impact. So for us at Purple Maya, we started out, we just were like, we want to teach kids how to code. We think that that's important. And so how do you guys think you would measure that? How do you think you would like measure success? So your plan is you're going to set up an after-school class, and you've got this teacher who knows how to code, and he's going to teach the kids how to build a video game. What do you think is a metric that would show success? Something I can measure that can say, I had an impact on these children's lives.
The number of children were created.
The number of children, how many games were created? Yeah. Other ideas? And maybe you'll come up with a good one, because I'm still refining this.
Butt hours is the butt hours.
Butt hours. Oh.
That's university speak for how long was the student in the chair doing work.
Okay. Yeah. Butt hours.
For me, it's post-program pathways. What are the students doing after the program? Still coding, still like to code. That's all I kind of do.
So how would you know that? How would you measure it?
Keep contact with them, teachers or follow-up. I create a blog, well, they create a blog page for them.
Yeah.
So they daily when they're coding, when we go to reflection, they'll type in what they learned that day. If they keep that up post-class, which a number of my students do, I know I kind of do my job.
Right. Good one. Jeff does almost the same thing that we do, so he's a great person to talk to about that. But yeah, so this is kind of the exercise that I've just gone through that for years, and we'll continue to be going through that. But that's, you're thinking through like what kind of information can I realistically gather, and in what ways, right? Am I willing to do the work of keeping up with these students after they've left the program? And if so, how am I going to do that? Is it going to be surveys? Is it going to be, what? Oh, I don't know. Anyway, so thinking through those things, and it's going to be different for whatever your particular project is, right? Kamu Enos, our board member, always tells us about how at Ma'o Farms, their metrics are the grade point average of the students and the sales of their organic farms. And I think they added in like BMI, or just kind of a measure of the health of the students. So my advice around metrics is like figure out, I think earlier it was said try to align with SDGs or with standard metrics. I think at Purple Maya we got lost for a bit because we were like thinking about like what are the standards in schools for learning computer science, and that just got really complicated. But that's not going to be relevant to a lot of you guys. The point being, what are like a handful of measures that tell a story that you can also keep track of, right? That you have the actual bandwidth and capacity to be measuring, and that is going to create a powerful story to report back to funders. Okay, so I think those are the main things in any project plan, is like your objectives, your activities, and what you're going to measure. And then that said, it's a matter of fitting into whatever a particular grant's schema is. The other main thing, I don't know how much more time I have, but briefly, the other main thing that I wanted to go over, and these are kind of different from the tips, so feel free to look through these tips later on, But the other main thing I just wanted to talk about is a lot of you guys are early on, right? So it was really hard early on fundraising because I think a lot of funders want to be able to put their money towards something that's proven. And if you haven't done anything yet, you're not proven, right? So what are your workarounds? Like, how do you address that as best you can? We talked a lot about ourselves, or we attempt to, right? So you talk about your team, what experiences you've had, what makes this team qualified to be doing what it's doing. What else? This is number 3 on the grant writing tips, by the way. Right, so showing all the resources that you're bringing to the project that's going to make it a success. And a lot of that is actually showing other funding that you are bringing to the project. So like I was saying earlier, like many funders don't want to be like, they don't want it to be like, oh, I'm funding 100% of your project. That's not okay for most funders. So you guys are all going to hopefully, you know, if you win a prize out of this whole situation, are going to be in a position of having some cash, right? So I think initially there's even like putting in your own money or your own time to show that there are resources going in. And this shows up like physically on the budget. Like you can make a column of in-kind contributions, match funds provided as, you know, from your own or from that you've won or that you've gotten from other grants. And it kind of snowballs, right? Lately, I don't know if this is a technical term, but lately I've been referring to anchor grants. So it's like kind of once you win one, that makes it easier in the rest of the process of applying to different grants, because you can say, we've already got X amount from X funder, and we only need this much more to round out the budget, right? So the budget is going to be slightly bigger than the amount of money you already have, right? And it's going to be a realistic, of course the budget should be a realistic appraisal of like what resources you actually need to do the job that you're saying you're going to do. But ideally it's kind of like in this range of like it's bigger than what you actually have, but you have something, right? So that you can show that you're bringing that resource to the project. And the rest of it is just showing that you have all the pieces that you need to succeed, even if you haven't done this before. And that can be a lot of things, but one thing that's important to think about is partnerships. So the first 2 things I'll look for as I'm like assessing, like, okay, what do we need for this grant, and like, can I do it by the due date? I'll look at what is their matching requirement. So how much, you know, what they're saying, yeah, we'll fund 50%, but we want you to have the other 50% available at the time that you apply, or they're okay with you having just putting in 25%, right? So what are their matching requirements? That's the first thing. And actually, the other first thing, I wouldn't even say it second, is if they have requirements for you to submit letters of commitment or letters of support from your partners or from people that you're working with that are going to make your project be a success. And I look at that early on because it can take a while to get partnerships secured. You got to like go talk to the person, tell them about your idea, tell them about, you know, the grant that you're going for, get them to kind of make some level of commitment that they're going to be participating. So the example for us, I think people look a little confused. Like the example for us for partners is like, if we're going to set up a class, you know, does the school know about it? You know, the school that we're targeting to have the after school class in, you know, are they on board? Are they like stoked that that's coming? Or, you know, will the project run into an immediate problem as soon as it's started because, oh, by the way, you have no contact at the school and they don't even really want you there, kind of thing, right? So I think figuring out, having your partnerships ahead of time is just super important to meet your deadline, but also it's like, if you can show that you have the support of a lot of partners and a lot of people believe in you and what you're doing, even if you haven't done it before, that's really going to help out your application, right? So, yeah, letters of support and letters of commitment. And I think those are the main things that I have to say out loud about grant writing. What?
Number 7.
I have 7 minutes left?
No, number 7.
Oh, number 7?
Yeah.
Right. So this is the advice that Olin gave me. Number 7, write like you're in love, which is kind of, it's confusing, right? Because grants don't make me feel that way, but that's kind of the way to channel. I think he didn't say this directly, but he said to kind of, you know, it's good to just actually start off your, you know, I don't know if you guys remember on worksheets to be like, my teachers were like, restate the question in the answer, right? So if it's a question about like, how will you have the partnerships that will support, you say in this very calming and reassuring way, the first answer is this project will be supported by the committed partnerships of many stakeholders, those kinds of things, right? And then you go on to explain that. You can't just state these things and that's enough. You explain what they actually are, but that kind of just directly answering the question and making it all sound like it's a really great thing, because it is a really great thing, right, that what you're doing. And the last one, actually 8, to me is kind of more important. I think you always have a better chance of winning a grant if you're building a relationship with a funder, if that's at all possible, right? Like different foundations have different ways that they do that. Some of them have open calls and they don't want to meet with you. Some of you only want, some funders only want grants from people who they have already met or who are like sponsored by their board of directors. So having somebody on your team or making connections through networks to be able to talk to funders is super important, and is probably more important than the actual like getting the grant writing totally perfect. But that said, it's an important part of it. So yeah, let me know if you have questions further about grant writing. I only know what I know, but I'm willing to share that. And yeah, that's what I have.
Does anyone have any questions? When you write a grant and say non-profit, is there a business plan requirement?
Not the ANA grant I tried to get, like a huge federal grant they asked for a business plan. But no, there isn't usually a business plan requirement. Sometimes there will often be a question about sustainability after the duration of this grant. Like they want to know how is this project going to sustain itself? How is this going to be not just we put in our money and you do something cool for a year and then it ends? So that you kind of have to be able to answer that question sometimes. Yeah. Joe?
Are there like any go-to fiscal sponsors on the island that you know of?
Well, there's us, I suppose, right? Go-to fiscal sponsors on the island?
So does the fiscal sponsor normally, are they in line with their goals, or like why would a fiscal sponsor choose to like work with you to accept the grant?
In my experience, it's literally just been like, they're usually your friends, or they're a nonprofit that has similar goals to what you're doing, and are interested in supporting that work. Yeah. I don't know about any go-tos, so you kind of have to just look around yourself. Darren?
So like Office of Hawaiian Affairs, you're required to go to their initial meeting, even if you want to submit a grant, and they at that meeting will say things like, these are a few of the fiscal sponsors, but they're only allowed to have one per grant cycle. So they kind of heavily hint who would be willing.
Yeah.
They want to help Hawaiian causes, so then they answer like, this is who would be most likely to build a relationship.
Yeah, and that's a great thing about like if you have a relationship with a funder, they might have some ideas of who could fiscally sponsor you. Yeah.
All grants you need to be a 501c3 or have a fiscal sponsor.
Yeah.
Because like Epic Games, they have the mega grants and they fund game development, but it kind of seems like I don't think they would require you to. I mean, because they fund indie game devs and stuff like that. But so I'm just wondering.
I found a couple of places that you don't have to be a nonprofit, but they're very few and far between.
That's probably one exception then.
Yeah, they're out there.
Because I don't know a lot of game devs
nonprofits. It's slipping from my mind, but there are grants for profits. It just like a lot of those are social enterprise.
Yeah, it could be out there, and I think it probably varies depending on like I'm very familiar with like STEM education grants, but it could be very different for like game development and this is totally I don't know anything about like science grants either. I don't know. I know that that's a huge thing like in grad school if you're doing sciences and things like that. That might be a different system, yeah. Other questions?
So let's say if you're sponsored by a co-sponsor and you want to do a co-op model, does that disqualify you from being sponsored? Co-op is a for-profit, right?
Yeah. I don't think it necessarily disqualifies you, but it could. I think it would become like a specifics thing. Like, so most foundations will have a list of like things that they fund and things that they don't fund. And sometimes, you'll get disqualified from that because they'll say we do not fund businesses or, and that's, okay, so that's the first thing I look at is, they're saying like we do not fund operational expenses or we do not fund events or we do not, every funder's got their specific do's and don'ts or like things that they're into and things that they're not. So look at that, check that out, and don't waste your time if it doesn't fit. Yeah.
Sources, where do you go to find the grants that you're applying
Oh, I was afraid someone was going to ask me that. Google, there's that. But I guess locally there's Hawaii Community Foundation. So this is what I'm learning. I've finally put it together. That there's certain, like a community foundation, they've kind of got a lot of different funds. So like individual rich families have their own funds and they just kind of hand over the management of the granting to Hawaii Community Foundation. So there's a lot in there. Bank of Hawaii has a number that they take care of. Does anybody know what are the other ones?
Castle Foundation?
There's Castle, there's Atherton, there's Cook, OHA is specifically for Hawaiian serving projects. I'm more familiar with the local scene than with nationwide grants. But yeah, we just got to do that initial research moment. Yes, Ruby.
There's a foundation that I just applied our art project for called the Awesome Foundation.
Yeah, they're awesome.
And they are awesome.
Yeah.
It's just a bunch of community people who get together once a month and they contribute $100 each. There's 10 of them, so every month they have $1,000 to give away. And I applied last week and got a call this week that we were awarded. So,
Yeah.
and it's a there's no strings attached. So you just basically tell them what you're going to do with the money, and they want to fund like really cool projects that are community based, and it's a very simple application online. Go to Awesome Foundation.
Yeah.
Hawaii, fill out the application, and that's it. So I would highly recommend it. They're looking for projects, so go apply.
Yeah, that's a great reminder. And it's so short, the application, which is great.
Very short,
Yeah.
Very decent.
Okay.
I have a quick question. How much time do you actually spend looking for grants?
You know what?
Versus,
Yeah.
so I'm trying to balance that because the majority of my time is spent actually looking for grants to make sure that they align with what we're doing.
Yeah.
And out of like a week's work, maybe I'll find one that
Right.
would be a really good fit. Is there a way to make it more efficient?
Yes.
Well, how do you make it more efficient? Yeah.
The Hawaii Community Foundation used to have an on-paper calendar of, they know the specific deadlines for basically Oahu and Hawaii, and saying when these deadlines are yearly, meaning the foundations go in cycles.
Mhm.
So then you can time out your time better instead of looking for the Manini stuff that won't pay out of your time.
Yeah.
So then you could balance it better.
I would say my experience has been that initially it was a lot of research and then it got to be less because I kind of began to know what is out there, what the landscape looks like. And then it's a matter of like keeping track of the cycles, right? Because like when they're going to announce, put their RFP out and when is the deadline and when are reports due and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know, I think it's a matter of, it's an initial a lot and then it will get better. Yeah.
My other question is,
Yeah.
Is there a resource for restricted versus unrestricted funds?
A resource
Yeah.
for that?
Yeah.
For understanding
And that's
that? Or
where,
for-
well, that's where I spend a lot of my time is trying to find grants that are going to be unrestricted.
Right. That's hard, and that sucks. I think a lot of the more progressive vendors are starting to realize that unrestricted is better if you're actually wanting to support the nonprofits that are on the ground doing the work. So that's hard. HCF Flex grant is the one that I know of that I think everybody kind of knows of. Yeah, I don't know. That's kind of all I can say about that dark cloud of like, yeah, that's hard. But we can think about that. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Anything else?
Yeah, so I thought I'd put on the chat brown hat since you did a crowdfunding round. Right up. Yeah. Anyways, so I'm going to do a quick thing on crowdfunding once this gets going. Yeah, I know there's others in this room who are maybe have done this before, so you have kind of the in-person doing it experience. I don't, so I'm not going to really tell you like Kelsey did about how to go through the process of doing these things and what kind of information you need to be putting in. But I more so just want to give you kind of an idea of what the landscape looks like and using this as a resource, because it is something that, for the most part, is less intensive from like a paperwork or preparation standpoint than raising a grant round or raising a venture capital, definitely raising venture capital. Some alternative options. Also, just to step back before I even start this, the Awesome Foundation, it seems like a prize. So prize funding is also another thing that usually doesn't get registered with people in terms of fundraising. You could be entering yourselves into prizes kind of all over the place. I started doing a kind of I guess a logbook of different prizes around the country that may be worthwhile looking into for regenerative businesses. There's a lot of organizations that are sort of interested in that concept, and so I'll send that to you guys once I get it a little bit more populated, and hopefully that'll be a resource for you guys. Anyways, so what is crowdfunding? It's a method of collecting many small contributions by means of an online funding platform to finance or capitalize a popular enterprise. So I'm going to dive into small contributions from who, and popular enterprise, what's an enterprise. So in terms of crowdfunding, it can be anybody. You don't need to be an accredited investor to crowdfund or to get money from that person. This is really just anybody who registers to a platform. As far as popular enterprise, an enterprise doesn't mean a business. You don't need to have a corporate business. It could really be an idea. It could be a social cause. It could be research. And there's crowdfunding for all sorts of different levels of anything really. So it's an interesting resource. There's a bunch of different forms of crowdfunding. There's 5 ones that I sort of just pulled out of my paper and added 1. So I guess there was 4. But the 2 that I'm going to focus on today are reward-based and donation-based crowdfunding and equity crowdfunding. The other 3, so debt-based, is like your lenders clubs where people sort of pool their money and they distribute loans. Litigation crowdfunding, I honestly don't know what that is. It just popped up. And then initial coin offering, kind of an emerging thing. It's also like a software token is another name for it. It's not really something that we need to be worrying about, but these first 2 are probably the most commonly used and most applicable to your guys' work. So with reward-based crowdfunding, it's basically the funder gets something in return in a future date for current financial support. So you're giving maybe a T-shirt or the MVP product or something in return for them to give you money. And this really started back in 2003 with this artist named Brian Camelio who started Artist Share. And the reason he started Artist Share was because he, as a musician, wanted to get his fans to pay for his next album. And so he was like, this is something that maybe all of us artists could be using. Can I get somebody to pay for an idea for an art piece, or somebody to pay for my next album? So he did that, and Maria Schneider, this jazz artist, really capitalized on that in 2005 and sort of started a big movement around crowdfunding. And so she went on Artist Share and ended up raising $130,000. How did she do that? So she had sort of a tiered system of rewards. And it was interesting. So she ended up being able to say that you can get my album a day early for $9.95. If you support me right now, for $9.95, I'll give you the access to the album a day early. She went all the way up to $10,000 for being an executive producer on the album cover, so you can be named as an executive producer, and ended up raising that $130K. It might not be tied to it, but she won a Grammy later that year. So I mean, it ended up leading to something. But it also ended up leading to the proliferation of a bunch of these other crowdfunding sources. So Indiegogo happened, kind of as a recognition that this was a viable source and that it was a real value add to some entrepreneurs and for other folks who are interested in starting things up. They did it in 2008, Kickstarter launched in 2009. Now there's a bunch of them, so these are just, 11 or 5 or 10 different examples of crowdfunding resources out there, or platforms out there, but there's 300 of these. And that number has grown. So it's, I guess, as of 2016, there were over 300. So sort of what I'm going to dive into and zoom in on is that there's these different platforms for a bunch of different things. So Experiment is an interesting one where it funds research projects only. So if you're doing scientific research, if you're trying to figure out how many lions are left in the Sahara, then great, somebody cares about that and they'll fund it and they want to see the outcome of that research fulfilled. This is donations based and it's all or nothing, but it could be applicable for those of you who, I guess there's not anyone in this room currently, who's working on more of a research based type of project. But there's also other ones that are like Plum Alley that invests in women and diverse founding teams. So these guys, this is kind of a group that in 2016 wasn't what it is now. It used to just be crowdfunding for women, but now it's turned into kind of an investors group where unaccredited investors can get access to crowdfunding deals that they bet, and then they get equity return from that. So those guys have scaled up, but the point is that there's different types of crowdfunding for different things. There's basically something for every industry, every form of an idea. There's values and there's risks in crowdfunding. So we talked about dilution earlier today. That is one thing that crowdfunding is not. It's not dilutive. You basically give a product out in the future and you receive the money now. But that leads to some risks, is that if you don't deliver that product in time, then you could be exposed to some liability. So it's good to get that LLC, it's good to get that layer of protection so that you aren't exposing yourself to liability. It is good alternative marketing. So like one of the things that Vince Kimura talked about when he was up here the other day giving a presentation at a tech workshop, is he did a crowdfunding round pretty substantially, still in it, but he gets a lot of validation from the community, and that's kind of like an unsaid advantage of crowdfunding. You've got hundreds, maybe thousands of people who are giving you your support and their dollars, and that feels good. And then it's also marketing. All those people who support it are going to be like to their friends, I just gave $100 to this thing, and I'm excited about it. So you should check it out. It's also, I guess, in terms of risks, the second bullet point here is that it's not something that you can get around taxation for. You're still going to have to pay your income taxes on this. If you make more than 20K or you have more than 200 people contribute, you're still paying taxes on it. But anything less than that, It's tax-free. It's a donation, essentially. Pivoting over to equity crowdfunding or Reg CF, regulation crowdfunding. This is kind of a new thing. Basically, the way that I like to think about this, or the way that it might be easy to think about, is that this is crowdfunding in a venture capital. It's basically venture capital and crowdfunding, where you can have a bunch of unaccredited investors deploying small amounts of money up to $107,000 each for, and I don't know why it's that number, for equity shares in an organization. So this is something that recently happened in 2016 because of the Jobs Act amendment that allowed private companies to do just that. It works like this. Like I said, I haven't done it, but I'm putting it up there, and you guys can just take a snapshot of it. I'll run it through right now. You can register the company, you file an offering statement for a broker-dealer that's FINRA certified. You set the terms of the, you make your term sheet. You launch the raise, you accept investment, but you have to close that crowdfunding round at least 21 days after you've started it. That gives them the ability to back out, because you're not dealing with accredited investors who are sophisticated, I guess. There's a couple of examples of these Reg CF type organizations or platforms. This WeFunder one is one that I've sort of been talking about the last few weeks. We had them come out and do a brunch, which is super cool. It's good information, but they have a really cool idea stage product. So the way that it works is you go and talk to them, you tell them I'm interested in doing a crowdfunding round or a Reg CF round. They'll help you to raise your first $10,000 through friends and family as basically validation that your idea is good. Friends and family is broadly defined, so this could also be your community members. So if you're well connected and have good relationships, go and ask everybody in your town or whatever. And after you've done that, once you've reached that 10K threshold, an investment committee will review it, puts it in front of a bunch of investors, and not only do the accredited investors who invest through WeFunder's fund take a look at the deal and potentially invest larger amounts of money through their syndicate, but also the people who are subscribed to the platform can go on there and invest their own money in their syndicate for equity from the platform. But WeFunder comes with a couple of other interesting value adds. They have an accelerator that may be helpful in the future. It's pretty low commitments, and they've got a pretty big mentor network. So good sort of opportunity. Republic is very, very similar. The only real difference is that Republic has criteria and that they market your products for you. So Republic is what Vince is using. He is on our mentor list, so if you have questions about how he did the Republic crowdfunding round, then feel free to reach out to us and we'll connect you. I'm sure he'd be willing to share. But anyways, there's pros and cons for Reg CF. And the pros here are that rather than the other form of crowdfunding, the donation-based or awards-based crowdfunding, you don't have to have a product. You don't have to have something substantial because you're exchanging securities. So it makes it so that you can raise money without having something. You are going to have to, of course, give this back in one way or another because this money doesn't come for free. But it could be helpful if you don't have an MVP. And the second value add is that some of these, I've only really seen two big ones for Reg CF. What's it called? Patreon started a Reg CF thing, but the two of those services that I referenced have non-monetary resources for founders. So good to know. Thought that I'd put this out there, and that's what I've got. So do you guys have any questions about crowdfunding? Maybe Chad can answer some. Okay, cool. All right.
Where did you do your crowdfunding?
Kickstarter.
So
Yeah.
how did you go?
We raised $10,000 in 2 months. It was a pretty cool experience. A lot of work. One thing that's pretty cool is like, you know, when we started the Kickstarter, we kind of thought that like we'll get 1,000 people to donate $10. You know what I mean? But in the end, we had a little over 100 people who donated a lot more money than we expected. So it's kind of more smaller crowd, passionate people like wanted to see us succeed. So I'm sure, you know, we're trying to figure out how can we reach out to get that 1,000 people to donate the $10. You know, kind of. So we might do another Kickstarter for our future dreams, but it's a lot of work. So I think like the 10K that we raise is maybe the minimal that we would want to do a Kickstarter like that. But
What do you find how it work, like just
you know, I just talked to her, type up some stuff, upload some pictures, launch the Kickstarter, and we'll be on our way. But I mean, just figuring out our story. You know, we designed. You know, we had a lot of graphic designers create a lot of images and stuff, and from what we wanted to pitch. Every tier, every package, you know, 20-something packages for different people of what they would have. Because we did that too in the producer thing, like 10,000. You know, you can get producer credit in our game and stuff like that. But you know, obviously none of that stuff really worked out. So just coming up with what each one of these things are, what we feel people was going to purchase, and then after the fact, getting the hats in, the shirts, the stickers, so you know, a lot of that $10,000 goes towards shirts, hats, shipping. You know, Kickstarter takes a fee, so it's a lot.
The advantage of like Legacy app is the way that like we funders that you set the terms for your investment. So you could do revenue shares, you could do like a save. You know, there's a number of different ways you can set your terms to be valuable for you in the long run, and you don't have to do all that sort of distributions and stuff.
There's companies that do that. So we ran a couple of Kickstarters. Now there's like organizations that will like do the modeling, like the tier modeling for you, and then work with the distribution for a fee. Right.
Almost there. Got 8 slides, really quick. On the topic of awesome foundation, not related, but I always want to share because I think it's awesome. My daughter went to school up the road, and one of her classmates in her kindergarten class, his name was Awesomeness. And I just thought I was so Awesomeness. Every time I would see him, I was, how'd you be Awesomeness? You're so awesome, Awesomeness. How awesome is that you named Awesomeness? Anyway, I digress. So 8 slides, talk about equity financing. All throughout the day, you guys, sounds like you guys are familiar with it, but just really quick, equity financing is this notion of getting money, like giving up something, right? Particularly ownership shares in your company. I'm supposed to talk about incubators, accelerators, and venture capital, so I thought I'd give you guys an overview. Many of you guys are familiar with it. Those who aren't, you know, incubators, there are a bunch of them, talk about a few of them. You know, I'm more familiar with accelerators and venture capital, so I'll spend a little bit more time on there. We've got a number of them in Hawaii. The duration for these organizations and these activities take anywhere between 3 to 6 months to set up as cohorts. Selection criteria is competitive, some would say hyper-competitive. I'm on one of the lead mentors for Blue Startups, and I think they get like dozens and dozens of applicants that apply to their accelerator, but they're in a competition too with other accelerators because they've had a number of companies that they've accepted that dropped out because they decided to go somewhere else. You typically get anywhere between $75,000 up to $250,000, but you do give up 5 to 7% of your company at the outset, right out of the gate. Where I spend most of my time is on the right side of the chart. Venture capital duration. You guys may have heard this sort of term before, but like when you sort of take money from a venture capitalist, it's as if you're getting married because sometimes it lasts longer than most marriages today, right? So it can last anywhere between 5 to 10 years. Cohorts, kind of, right? When you, as an investor, as a venture capitalist, I'm investing, our firm is investing. anywhere between 20, 22 companies, and those companies essentially make up a cohort. And depending on the firm, those companies essentially constitute a cohort that can help each other out. Super competitive. I don't have the stats off the top of my head, but it's super hard to get money, notwithstanding all the resources and funds that have popped up recently. Funding cycles, funding amounts anywhere between $500,000 up to hundreds of millions of dollars, especially more recently. And when you're taking venture capital money, a good sort of ballpark thing to kind of keep in mind is like 20%, so you can almost kind of estimate that you give up 20% of your company depending on the funding cycles and whatnot. And that's sort of a function of strength of the business, who's around the team, the investor, markets, those kinds of things. These are the various accelerators in Hawaii. I wouldn't spend too much time on them. All of them are specialized to the extent, I guess, of their founders' expertise. So with Blue Startups, they typically focus on technology companies, gaming types of companies, because of who the founders are and who the managing partners are. The one to the top, on the top right-hand side, Hatch is one of the newest ones. Actually just opened up, or just the announcement was made a couple of weeks ago. It's an aquaculture accelerator that's based at Neoha on Hawaii Island. Similar funding model, they give you some money, they help you with some of the, bring expertise to the table to help you accelerate your idea to get to that next level of business development and funding and whatnot. A couple of other ones that maybe aren't as known but are pretty successful. Maui Food Innovation Center is focused on food entrepreneurs. A lot of successful little companies that have come through that. And GVS is the accelerator that's based in Hawaii Island, Honolulu. They typically do media types of projects. There are a bunch of other accelerators that I alluded to it before. It's kind of cool, like within the last maybe 5 years, right, with the rise of accelerators, you got more specialization. So you see a lot of accelerators that are specializing in. So maybe just a couple that I'll call out. Thrive is one that's based in Salinas, California, and it's more focused on ag tech entrepreneurs, so anything and everything having to do with agriculture and leveraging technology is an accelerator that folks should check out. One of the newest ones is called Backstage Accelerator, and so this is a firm founded by a gay woman. They focus on entrepreneurs of color and of the LGBTQ community. The bottom right hand is a pretty cool, and it's called Sustainable Ocean Alliance. They're focused on entrepreneurs and products entrepreneurs with companies that are doing good things for the ocean. And then probably the most popular one is Y Combinator. All the popular companies, a lot of popular companies, some of which are worth billions of dollars, have come through that. But within recent years, they started opening up their pool and started accepting nonprofits too. So you can be a nonprofit, a high impact potential nonprofit, and apply to get into Y Combinator. And that's sort of like getting into Harvard, getting into Stanford if you get accepted into Y Combinator in particular. This is a pretty interesting one that I just found when I was pulling this together in the back. This is accelerators that are more focused on ed tech. I know there's one entrepreneur, a couple of other folks maybe that express some ideas, but these are all organizations or accelerators that have offer up money, mentoring, resources in exchange for some of the company. And they're sort of aligned, kind of in different parts of the country. Questions so far?
There's also some accelerator networks, like the global accelerator network.
Yeah, I'm not so familiar, but I do know that Blue Startups is a part of that.
Right.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, I was trying to get us into it earlier. Yeah, so I a little bit familiar with it. We're way earlier than we would need to be here. It's just a matter of accelerator, it's more of an education for the accelerator.
Yeah. So, what is this? This is a bit of a chart. Now, some of you may be thinking about venture capital as sort of funding source for your businesses. If you're thinking about building a scalable, high growth type of company with high impact, then venture capital could be a thing. Mentioned earlier today that there are a lot more different types of investors that are becoming, having access to capital, deploying capital that have impact as a firm's thesis. And so what this attempts to do is just provide sort of kind of a view as to the type of investor, at what stage there are, and the kinds of things that are associated with that particular round. So this assumes that you have a product, you have a team, you have maybe some customers and things that are up and running, and you want to do a pre-seed round, right? This is post-angel financing. You maybe put in $20,000 worth of your own money, you've got some customers, right? You want to raise a pre-seed round. So what I've seen and what's sort of typical is, companies that are raising about $1 million at a pre-money valuation of $2 to $3 million bucks. When you say pre-money, that's essentially what the value of the company is, right? So if you do the math, if you're taking in $1 million at $3 million, you're essentially giving away, it's at a quarter of your company, right, at a pre-seed round. Now what that money goes towards is to try to get traction in the form of revenue. And so what the mile markers are, MMR stands for, it's a metric used to denote money that's made on a recurring basis, on a monthly recurring basis. Make sense so far? Yeah. So you can be zero, not making anything, but get up to $12,000 and well, Jen, you got a good idea, you've got a team, you've got some little bit of market traction, probably could raise $1 million bucks at that pre-money valuation, and that'll give you a runway of 12 months. So 12 months meaning you've got 12 months in order to get to the next round of finance. And this kind of point highlights the point about venture capital being this game, right? You've got to kind of, once you get on this flywheel, unless you're knocking it out with customers, this is sort of the kinds of things that you can expect when you're trying to raise money. So at the seed round, where we pretty much operate, right, we're looking at companies that are raising anywhere between $1.5 to $2 million, right? They're valuing their company now between $5 and $8 million bucks. And so as an investor, I've got to think like, okay, amongst the 20 or 30 companies that I'm looking at any one time, is this the company that I want to put in that would get me to this next marker, right? Are they going to be able to hit those mile markers or hit this mile marker within an amount of time that then they would have to go and raise $5 million bucks at the next round? Kind of geeking out and throwing a lot at you guys, so it's too much to kind of move on to the next thing. But this is sort of like typical kinds of things that you would see, I'm seeing right now in the market with respect to raising money at these different funding levels. And then there's also, Series C, Series D, then you go public or you get acquired somewhere along the lines. Yeah, questions? No? All right, so coming back to like the universe, I put this up here because it is hard to raise money, but there are a lot of funds out there, a lot of money out there, a lot of different differentiation in terms of things that they're looking for. And it just sort of comes back to this idea of like, what's the foundation of your business? What do you want to do? How big do you want to go? And just viewing this network, this universe of folks as people who could write that first $500,000, $1 million check to take you to the next level, where then you could pitch any one of these guys. And so this is kind of not exhaustive list, but it is a good list of like 600 folks that are sub $50 million that would invest at that Series C, Series A rounds of financing. They kind of show what services, that sector they invest in, the stage that they're in, where they're at. Obviously, a lot of them are in the Silicon Valley area. But you'd be amazed because there are a lot of different areas that VCs are looking for money or looking for opportunities. And it isn't just the typical software companies, technology companies, right? There are a lot of different categories that that money is kind of looking for opportunities in. Questions?
So there's some VCs that are funded at different stages, not just early investment, like stage A or B.
Yeah, you typically sort of stay close to your vest, right? So for us, we primarily invest only in Series C and we invest opportunistically at Series A. But as an investor, right, I got to get a certain amount of the company up front, and I'll reserve money to follow the company into this round and maybe into this round, right? But at this point in time, checks are like $20 million, right, that is collectively being raised. Me as an investor that controls $30 million, right, that has to be split up between 20 or so companies. I can't write that side of the check. So yeah, you would get specialists, essentially, folks that know that space, that can write big checks, that have the networks in order to take the company to that next level, would specialize there. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Does being a nonprofit have conflict with joining incubators and accelerators?
You know, there are accelerators that focus on nonprofits. So I think Fast Forward is one that comes to mind because Alec brought them up. But they're an accelerator that focuses on nonprofits, and I guess the funding would not necessarily be equity financing, but it would be like grants and maybe I think.
I mean, just in the list that you have, there are 3 of them do nonprofits. Imagine People does nonprofits, 500 does nonprofits, and so does Canada. And then there's like Village Capital that does nonprofits.
I don't know if any of you guys are nonprofits, but yeah. No. Other questions?